This is it, folks. The last stop on our region pack journey. And this time we're heading to the northeast of the USA. The northeast is where it all began. And as a result, the buildings are older, they're made of brick, and due to the age of these cities, they're generally denser than those in the southwest. And in my opinion, this pack does a good job of showcasing those differences. The pack provides you with the tools needed to create a beautiful northeastern city or even the downtown of a smaller community. Further, some of these assets will be applicable not just to the northeast, but also the southeast, midwest, and eastern Canada. But more on that a bit later on in the video. First, let's give credit to the creators. Bad Peanut, Beesquagelhausen, Darf, Jez, Grunny, King Leno, Smileys, and Sniggledigit. If you're experiencing a bit of deja vu, feeling like we just went over the same list of names last week, it's for good reason. Many of these creators worked in the Southwest region pack as well. In fact, the only difference appears to be that Bad Idea was swapped out for Sniggledigit in this one. Now, I won't repeat the praise that I gave the other creators. If you want to learn more about them, check out my Southwest region pack video. But I do want to highlight Sniggledigit. Their name might not instantly sound familiar to you, but I'm sure that their work will. They helped create the Metro Overhaul mod, Traffic++, which is the precursor to TMPE, one-way train tracks, and perhaps most famously, Network Extensions 1 and 2. Just like the other creators, they're a super talented OG Skylines creator who helped develop some of the most impactful mods for City Skylines 1. With this roster of creators, you know that the assets are going to be great. By my count, they've created 6 new zoning districts, 225 new growable assets, 9 city service buildings, and 5 signature buildings. That's 239 assets in total, putting this on par with the German, Japanese, and Chinese region packs in terms of size. So in this video, I'll show you where to get the pack, take a tour of each asset, show you how they fit into an existing build, and share my overall impressions of the pack. And if you've enjoyed this trip around the world, hit the like button. And if you're sad that it's coming to an end, hit the like button for that too, and let me know which pack was your favorite in the comments below. Or just leave an emoji representing your favorite pack for the sake of engagement. And without further ado, let's jump right in. To download the region pack, head to Paradox Mod's in-game or via web browser and search for USA Northeast Pack. Once you find it, add it to a playset, and it will immediately begin downloading. This region pack clocks in at over 4 gigabytes. That means it's about the same size as the Eastern Europe and Japan packs. And like I always say, if you're space constrained, only install packs that you intend to use in your build. And now that we've installed the pack, let's head into the game. Before we take a look at each of the assets, I wanted to talk about my organization of the Growables. Now, in general, I've broken these up into zoning categories and size, and I'm making this view available to you as a guide on my website, cityplannerplays.com, so that hopefully it can be helpful for you if you're looking for a specific asset for your build. Now, I know if you look at my website, there are a couple of different guides that are missing. I am working on posting those, but I need to reorganize some of the assets so that they're organized by size. And with that out of the way, let's take a look at each of the assets. And we begin with median density row homes. Now, these are the lowest density residential assets that come with this region pack. And though I'm guessing it's going to disappoint some folks, I think it's partially made up for by the quality of these row homes. Because in my opinion, these are some of the best row homes in the game, bar none. First, these come in 3 different depths, 2, 3, and 4 units deep. And one thing you'll notice right away is that there aren't duplicates through here. So that means that if you are micro-targeting a specific asset, like you want to have this one right here, zone 4 units deep, and you've got a 25% chance of it spawning. It also means that if you stagger your lot depths, you'll get a variety of assets, which I think is pretty exciting. But even where you might not expect to see a bunch of variety, such as these 2 different variants of the 2 unit deep assets, you're going to get a bunch. And that's because the level 1, 3, and 5 variants are very different from one another, which is a really sneaky way of making it feel like you have more assets. I also love that many of these assets have a sense of history. For instance, these row homes right here have moss growing on some of the roof tiles right there. It just makes it feel very old. This is actually the exact same tactic that the UK pack used to make some of their buildings feel older. And I love that. You'll also notice that on the roof, there's some wear, there's some scratching, a couple of cracks. Just makes it all feel that much older. One of the things I adore about this pack is that the sides aren't blank. So this is something that I've harped on before. There are windows right here, which means that this could be a corner piece. You could cover it up, have another building side by side with it, and then it's a wall-to-wall building. Or if it was a scrape and there used to be a building here and maybe the landlord decided to refurbish the outside and add windows, it gives you a whole bunch of options for these buildings. And in my opinion, that's how it should be. There are some buildings like this though that have those flat walls, and it's fine so long as it's not all of them. And that is something that on this pack, you can look forward to having kind of a mixture of these. One final thing I want to point out about these buildings is that not all of them are wall to wall. And it's pretty easy to see which ones aren't. This one right here has a driveway on the side, as do these three, and this one right here. But I wanted to point that out because that makes these unique, because most row homes are wall to wall, but not all of these ones are. Honestly, it makes sense if you've ever seen these around. Some of them are wall to wall and some of them are not. Next up, we have medium density residential. And these are fantastic assets that have a lot of possibilities. First of all, you'll notice that there are 4 different lot depths here, but for some of the categories, there's only one building. So that is a potential issue for some people, and it's a potential opportunity. So for instance, if you want to have this building right here, very easy to target it, zone a 5-unit deep lot. If you want to have this 2-unit deep building, exact same thing. But it also means that if you're not careful and you try to make a block that is completely 5 units deep, you'll get the same building over and over and over again. So be thoughtful about that. And one of the things that I love about these assets is that a few of them have trees baked into the asset themselves. Particularly at the front, that's really helpful because it means that you don't have to make that false choice between parking and trees. That's something that is really bothered me about City Skylines 2 ever since the first time I played it, and these assets partially resolve that. I also love that even though there's not a lot of assets in this category, there's enough variation between the assets with the coloring and things of that nature that it feels like there are more assets than there actually are. Now, one thing you'll notice is that once again, we've got windows on the side here, and what that means is there aren't any corner buildings. But I think it's completely fine because this building right here could be a corner building because we have the windows on the side. It feels good. It's also a wall-to-wall building, which is almost universal within these assets, with the exception of the 2-unit deep asset right here. And you can kind of tell it because there's a little bit of pavement right there on the side. So just know that if you're zoning that 2-unit deep building, it's not wall-to-wall, but all of the rest of them are. Now, I also want to shout out this building. I don't know that there's any other residential building in the game that has an advertisement at the top, but I love that because in one of the communities I worked in, there was one residential building that had an advertisement on the top. It was a vestige of the 1940s, and there was actually a passage in the zoning code written to eliminate all messaging and billboards on the top of buildings like this because we didn't want that aesthetic in an urban downtown anymore. But there's a little bit of history right here. That is why that is here. And just in general, these are beautiful buildings. They have a lot of character, a lot of ornate detail, you need a lot of different building materials, a lot of different colors, and it all feels historic. And honestly, it feels East Coast, but it also feels Midwestern. And just like the previous buildings, I think you could use them basically anywhere. Now, there is one modern asset in this pack as well. This is a 5/1, just like we found in the Southwestern pack. And I'm really happy that they included this in here because it means that you could have a very historic block that has a brand new building right in the middle of it. I see that all over the place, and it's like that all over in these older communities. Next up, we have mixed residential. And in my opinion, this is where the region pack really starts to hit its stride. So these assets right here are all mixed residential. So this is considerably more assets than we had in the previous 2 categories. Now, there are going to be some duplicates, which means that you can combine these, and there's some other trickery to make it feel like there are even more assets that we'll go over in just a second. But first, you'll notice that the most diversity is going to be in 2 or 4 units deep, making 4, 6, and 8 unit deep blocks really the ideal for this category. There are a couple of 3-unit deep pieces as well. I think those are really just fillers so that if you wanted to have a corner, you could. Look at these assets. These are outstanding, and I think that they're going to work in a variety of cities. These are the kinds of assets that I think have been a big miss in Skylines 2 in general. I think the most difficult type of street to create in the game right now is kind of a neighborhood serving arterial that has mixed use buildings. And that's because the mixed use buildings that we had were just really, really tall. These are not that. They still make me wish that we could lock buildings in place because in some cases you want to have a 3-story building and not a 6-story building. But this is much more appropriate than a 12-story building, which is what the vanilla mixed use residential buildings give you. I also love that there are buildings like this where there are 2 tones for the bricks, which makes it feel like there are more buildings and more asset variation. Now, once again, we've got some historic looking buildings. Check this bad boy out. There's some grime and dirt at the bottom, and on the top, it looks like there's moss and leaves. These are perfect for a big city, and they are perfect for a small town. These are the kinds of buildings that I grew up next to in a town with less than 10,000 people. And it's the kind of buildings that I see every single day in a city with 250,000 people. So it's pretty darn cool. There's some repeats, like this building probably looks very familiar because we just saw it right here, but it has ground floor retail right now, and that's completely fine. And you're gonna notice that some of these look like they're the same. It's because some of these are corner pieces and others are not. So this building right here, flat wall, This one's a corner piece. So it looks very similar, but it has windows there. And just in general, absolutely beautiful. Lots of colors, lots of different textures. It makes it feel like these could have been remodeled or refurbished over time. Now, I mentioned the different heights. That's not to say that there aren't taller buildings in this category. You can see that if you go for this 4-unit deep building, you have the potential of getting something that's like 12 stories tall, which is fine. I mean, that's fine. You can also avoid it by zoning 2 units deep. So you have options here. And there's a mixture of old and new feeling buildings here. There's a mixture of really ornate buildings and fairly plain looking buildings. And again, we've got the mixture of corners and non-corner pieces. Absolutely outstanding. Beautiful assets. I'm going to use these all over the place. There's a number of places that I can think of that I want to just put these assets just to make it feel like the kind of city that I was envisioning. Magnolia County better watch out because a whole bunch of buildings are about to get replaced. And then our final residential category is high density residential. And what might surprise many of you is that there aren't all that many of these. What you see right here is what you get. As far as the asset variation goes, you're gonna have the most variation at 5 units deep, and you'll be able to select 3 and 4 unit deep buildings basically at will because there's only one of each. And for 2 units, you get 2 different asset variations. Now these are very nice buildings, and to me, what this means is that this pack is really pushing you to have mixed use, and to me, that's completely fine. It also makes me wonder how these buildings and the mixed use buildings are gonna look next to some of the North American vanilla high density buildings, because if they look perfect, I guess there's not really a big need for this asset class, and that's maybe why there aren't as many of them. But what we do have here, very, very nice assets. Again, you've got that mixture of colors on the brick, which makes it feel like there are more assets than there actually are. Slight, subtle variations in the heights, and definitely a lot of different building materials, which feels really, really nice. Next up, we have low density commercial. And this is gonna sound really dumb, but even though there aren't a ton of assets in this category, it's just from here to here, these might be some of the assets I'm the most excited about. If you're creating a small town downtown, you can't do it without assets like this, having those canopies over the street, the bricks. This is exactly what I grew up next to. The downtown that I used to walk in every single day had a bunch of buildings like this. Again, we've got windows on the side, which means that there's a lot of variety here. You can place these as corner pieces, mid-block pieces. They're wall-to-wall. They're outstanding. These right here are more modern-looking commercial buildings that you'd see. So on a street like we have a Willie Street here in Madison, a lot of the new commercial looks like this, where it's still using brick for the facade, but it just looks much more flat and much more modern. And you're definitely seeing that with these right here. We've also got some of the historic looking buildings. And you can imagine mixing these in with some of those mixed use buildings, considering they look basically identical. And then right here, more wonderful downtown looking buildings. All of these, every single one of these is going to be applicable to a small town in basically anywhere in North America. And then there's probably one of the most special assets in the game, in my opinion. Now, this is kind of a strange looking asset on its face. Looks a little worse for wear, an old historic building. Then it gets remodeled and it starts to look a little bougie, a little fancy. And then by the time you get here, it's now a public market. This is exactly what's happening in my community right now. We're taking it, actually, it's an old fleet warehouse and turning it into a public market. And it has the signage that you'd expect to see. The outdoor seating is very modern, very hip. That is history right there. And these assets have found a way to work history into the game, even though the game doesn't really handle history all that well. So I just love these so much. And then our final zonable category is high density office. And I think that these are going to be a welcome addition for many folks. These are some of the only 6 unit deep assets in the entire pack. That's where the most variety is, followed up by 4 units deep and 2 units deep. Nothing 3 or 5 units deep, interestingly enough. These are mostly very tall buildings. There's a couple of shorter ones, but as you level up, they get tall very, very quickly. If you're looking to recreate Boston, Manhattan, Philly, you're gonna need these assets, and they deliver. These are incredibly detailed. They're very, very attractive. You've got a lot of different building variations and textures. Makes it feel like over time, additions were added onto these buildings to make them feel a bit more grand. And some of these buildings, the way that they change, you can see the progression, and it's awesome. So just really, really like that. I really love when assets transform like this because it makes it feel like over time they've been evolving. And we get the exact same thing right here. Kind of a low 2-3 story building. We get this addition right here. And then at level 5, all of the air rights are taken up. And in general, lots of architectural variety. It makes it feel, again, like there are more assets than there really are because of the colors, the variety, the differences in heights, just really outstanding offices. And if you've been dying to be able to change the look of your skyline, these offices are what is going to do it for you. These are great. And next we have one of my favorite tests, the Recolor test. And bluntly, this pack doesn't do great with Recolor, at least not for the most part. One of the reasons I say that is it's not very predictable. So I've used red, green, and blue across all of these assets, and you can see that it just doesn't make a lot of sense. There's not a consistency here. So in some cases, it looks like blue is the main color, and others red is the main color. Some assets don't recolor. Some only have things like parapets that recolor or awnings. Some are blending all the colors together. It's a real mixed bag. So it's good that some of the assets have their own baked in variation because it's really difficult to figure out what's actually happening. And I find that for most of the asset categories, you're going to see that, but I'd still encourage you to play with it because like, look at this asset right here. You get both red and green, and then the blue is the roof. So you can absolutely recolor that one. It's just what I think my big takeaway with these is that you're not going to be able to just copy a color and paste it to another building and expect that it's going to look good. You're gonna have to basically play with every individual asset to get the perfect recolor. So again, a bit of a mixed bag with the Recolor test. Your mileage may vary, but I definitely encourage you to check it out and give it a shot. Next, we have our city service buildings, starting here with this water tower. And this might look basic, but it's one of my favorite assets in the game. First of all, it has basically the same specs as the vanilla water tower. It has a little bit more capacity and a little bit more expense. But what I like about this is the upgrades. So here in the US, we have quite whimsical water towers, and this is a whimsical water tower. So you can have this absolutely lovely smiley face with sunglasses. You can also have this welcome sign, increases the attractiveness of your city, or you can have just something that says don't waste water, a nice public message. Now, if you're not from the US, this might seem really strange, but communities pride themselves on wacky water towers. One of the best examples of this, I mean, there are so many. There are water towers that look like corn cobs. There's one that looks like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And then there's this one here in Florence, Kentucky that I absolutely adore. It says Florence, y'all. And the reason it says this is because it used to advertise for a mall, but the water tower went up before the mall did. And the state actually stepped in and said, you can't advertise something on the interstate that doesn't exist. So the cheap option was to change mall to y'all, and it's now taken over the city's lore. Their baseball team is now called the Y'all Stars. So it's just one of those things where like, this is a very American thing. We love our water towers being wacky. You love to drive past them on the interstate, and I love it. That's a wonderful asset. Next, we have healthcare facilities, and we have both a clinic and a hospital. Now for this clinic, it's got basically the exact same specs as the vanilla clinic. The main difference is that your patient capacity is doubled. So this is kind of a no-brainer. Not only is it a beautiful looking building, but the number of employees is the same and you can have more patients here. You also get an additional ambulance. There's also one upgrade. You can increase the patient capacity even further to 120 and it adds those wings onto the front. Very attractive asset, basically the exact same footprint as a vanilla building. And in my opinion, much more appropriate for basically an East Coast, Midwest US build. And then we've got this hospital right here, and this one's very curious. It's about half the size of the vanilla hospital, the exact same cost, but the main difference is that the patient capacity is considerably less. So you look at, and so are the number of ambulances. We're going from 30 here, 30 ambulances down to 20. I kind of like it. I think it makes sense. You get to kind of choose your own adventure with the upgrades. You can add the specialized treatment ward and get an additional 180 patient capacity. You can also add on this trauma center, another 300 patient capacity. And then you can add the helipad on as well. This gives you one medical helicopter and 20 more patient capacity, and that's going right on the top. So again, this is much more appropriate for an East Coast build. Looks much more realistic than the vanilla one. And even though you're losing capacity up front, you're able to add it on the back end. And as a result, I think it is a very solid option for a hospital. Next up, we have our educational facilities. And there's only two in this pack. It's an elementary school and a high school. but they're both fantastic assets. Now the elementary school is right here, and it's basically a slightly expanded version of the vanilla elementary school. Everything basically scales. So we've got the same number of employees, but in terms of students, your capacity is 1,200. What I like about this the most though, is that unlike the vanilla counterpart, this gets +1 attractiveness, which I think is pretty interesting. You get that 1 outdoor recreation. So people want to live next to this because of the way it looks. It's also got an upgrade. You can add 300 student capacity by adding on that extension onto the top, which is honestly how you'd expect this expansion to occur in an urban area. There are no sub-buildings, so if you're looking to have a playground, you're gonna have to add that yourself because all that you got for this asset is a little playground in the back and a whole bunch of seating. And in terms of size, it's about half the size of its vanilla counterpart, which is a very welcome reduction in size. And then for the high school, we're looking at basically the exact same specs. So 800 student capacity once again, but again, this one has that +1 well-being within a little over a kilometer and +25 outdoor recreation in its base configuration, which makes it just slightly better than that vanilla high school. It's also got an upgrade. These extension wings will add 500 student capacity and make it look like a much larger high school. Now, the shame of this is that there are no football fields or anything like that, so you are stuck with just the amenities back here. But this is a much more North American looking high school in my opinion. I think this will fit really well in a variety of builds, both large city and small town. In a small town or suburban area, you just need to add on some facilities, either by plopping some of the facilities from the vanilla high school or by using some of the large sports parks. But absolutely lovely looking asset. And I love that from a size comparison, it's basically the same. The asset just looks a ton nicer in my opinion. And then we have our fire protection buildings, and these are really unique. First of all, this reminds me of an asset from City Skylines 1. I believe it was the Ghostbusters fire station that I used to plop in cities because it provided a very localized fire coverage. So if you were in a dense city, this is a way to not demolish your whole city and still get a bit of fire protection. And this asset does exactly that. You get one vehicle, very small radius, couple of employees, very, very perfect for a dense downtown, adding in just a bit of fire protection. No upgrades on this one. It is what it is. And then right here, we have a fire headquarters building. And this is basically the large fire station, but it doesn't have disaster response. Still, this is perfect for a dense urban area. You can add on the helipad upgrade, and the price basically scales the vanilla fire station. So even though you have less capacity in terms of vehicles, even though you have less upgradability, the cost is reflective of that. It's just a little bit cheaper than that vanilla counterpart. And the footprint is not even comparable. This is much better for an urban area. And then our final city service buildings are right here, the police stations. And these are really interesting assets for a couple of reasons. First of all, we've got this small police station right here. It is very tiny. It's a little bit smaller than the small police station that comes with the vanilla game, and it has roughly the same specs. The only difference is that this one has one less police vehicle. They both have 10 jail cells. But what makes this interesting is that you can upgrade this. So whereas this small police station is what it is, this one right here can be added onto with extra jail cells, which also gives you one more patrol car. And that expands within the footprint of the building and adds it on right there, which makes this a much more compelling option than our small police station. Now, in addition to that, we also get a police headquarters building. And this one's interesting because it has more jail cells, but fewer police vehicles. So this one has 200 jail cells and 14 police vehicles, whereas the vanilla variant has 100 jail cells and 20 police vehicles. Now, the interesting thing about this one is that there's only one upgrade. You get the helipad, you can't add on to the police cars. So my guess is you'd have to have more overall police stations if you were going to use this asset. But bluntly, this is a much more urban, much nicer looking asset in my opinion, much more realistic looking, and would fit in a variety of North American cities much better than this one over here would. And while there are perhaps fewer city service buildings than other packs, I feel like all of these are very high quality, and I'm going to be using all of them in my builds. We also get 5 new signature buildings, and these are absolutely fantastic. The first 2 here are residential buildings, and this teeny tiny mansion right here is the Atkin Palmer Mansion. This unlocks at milestone 1 with a population of 20,000, which is kind of funny. There's no way you're at milestone 1 if you have 20,000 population, but I really love this mansion because these sorts of buildings are in a lot of small towns where I live, and whoever founded the town or had the prominent business that helped build the town also built themselves a mansion that looks like this, and I could see this working in so many builds as a result. Next, we have the Frank Frankfurt Mansart building. This unlocks at milestone 8 when you have 100 level 5 northeastern high-density housing buildings. This is honestly going to be one that's pretty difficult for most people to unlock, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, because there aren't that many northeastern high-density housing buildings. In fact, if we look over here, these are all of the northeastern high-density housing buildings. So you're really narrowing it down to this building here and basically all the ones at the end. So the number of people who have 100 of those in their city is probably going to be relatively muted. So this is more of a region pack critique generally. There are a number of region pack signature buildings that unlock specifically with certain types of region pack zoning. And I hope they reconsider that in the future, because it's going to be really difficult to reach that if you want to have a lot of diversity in your buildings. But the building itself is absolutely beautiful. This one kind of reminds me of some of the office buildings that we're getting with this pack, and it would be great to put this side by side with one. Next, we have 2 commercial structures. This one right here is the Vrijog building. This unlocks at milestone 9 when you ship 4,000 media goods. And it is a really striking structure. That roof right there. Man, oh man, I've seen buildings with these metal roofs and boy, just beautiful. That would be a copper roof right there. And it looks weathered and worn. And I love that so much. Next to that, we have the exact opposite. We have what looks like a fairly new hotel, the Northeastern Inn. This unlocks at milestone 9 when you've shipped 5,000 lodging goods. And again, just a very nice looking asset, and it unlocks fairly early. Both of these unlock fairly early within the lifespan of your city. So very cool to see those. And lastly, we have the Imperial State Building. Obviously, no inspiration with the name here. This is an absolutely outstanding asset and absolutely massive. Now, this unlocks with 2,000 level 4 northeastern high density offices. And I'm glad they went with level 4, because having 2,000 level 5 buildings would be really challenging. I know that I just gave a critique to this building for requiring a whole bunch of level 5 northeastern high density housing buildings, but the reason why I'm okay with it with the Imperial State Building is there's just a lot of offices, and I have a feeling that many people are going to place a whole bunch of these in their city. So to me, that makes a bit more sense, and having level 4 buildings means that you don't have to stress about it, because getting level 5 buildings can be challenging at times. These are absolutely outstanding buildings, and I love that they kind of cover the full spectrum of a city's life. You have one that you'd have at the very start of your city's founding, and one that you'd have at the very end game. Absolutely lovely. And now for the Ploppable recolor test, you can tell that it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I would say that these actually recolor, the ones that do recolor more predictably than the Growable buildings. So you can see that we can't do anything with our water tower, but our healthcare and education buildings, you can recolor them. You can't do anything with police and fire. And for our signature buildings, you can recolor half of them. But thankfully, the one that you can recolor, the most important one, the Imperial State Building, totally recolorable and very predictable. So if you're into recoloring, you're definitely going to be pleased with how the Ploppables work. Next, a couple of quick asset tests here in Magnolia County. Now, we just built this area in episode 43, and I'm not really super thrilled with the way that it turned out. Got a whole bunch of European row homes right here, and then a bunch of commercial that I really wanted to feel more like a neighborhood main street and less like a strip shopping center. So I'm going to dezone all of this and replace this with some of the new buildings. Now that these have all spawned in, let's take a look. And one thing that's really nice about this is you get to see that these buildings are just not all that big. These are the commercial buildings right here. And I didn't even notice this. This is not a wall-to-wall building. It actually has a little bit of an alleyway right here to get to some parking in the back. And you'll find those little nooks and crannies all over in these wall-to-wall downtowns. And that looks fantastic. And I love that because we have windows on the side, it feels okay that we have that gap right there. Now, speaking of windows on the side, perhaps this is why some of the asset critters don't like using them. We have one that's kind of being covered right here, but honestly, I'm able to forgive that because I like the overall aesthetic of the windows on the side more than I care about that being covered up. Now right here, I think we've got a case of an asset being rotated in the wrong direction. I don't think that our public market is supposed to face the parking lot, so we'll have to play around with that a little bit. Same thing right here. I just think that this is, again, zoning not occurring where you'd predict for it to occur. I wanted it all front this street, but it's kind of all over the place. So I think you're going to need to really be careful with the zoning with these assets. You're going to have to make sure you're fronting the right locations. Now, I will just use Move It to rotate this around to see how it looks. And my guess is this is actually how it's supposed to look, where the front of the street has these facing right here. And then on the corner is where you get this public market. And maybe at one point, this was like a body shop or something like that, or a gas station. And now it's becoming more of this coffee shop type place. So I really like that. For this one, same deal. You know, it's funny. It's not supposed to be set this far back, but I think it could work. I really do. The only criticism I have is that a lot of this exact same building spawned in this 3-story building, but this is the exact massing and scale that I was hoping for. Now, onto these row homes. These are fantastic, but I do think that I would probably personally spend a little bit more time trying to get the specific assets that I'm looking for, because you can tell that the front yard setbacks are kind of all over the place. And maybe that's the look you're going for, but it isn't necessarily what I would go for. So what I would do, most likely, is either something like this, where you get some of the same assets side by side, or something like this, where again, you get the same assets side by side. But I might even go a step further with these. And if you wanted, you could pull these and turn it into one larger building. Although it does seem like, because there's this pedestrian facility on the side of this, you're gonna have to be really careful with it. But we've got a whole bunch of buildings that look just like this in Madison, and I would love to recreate them, and now it's possible. Now, this again drives home the point to me that we've really got to be able to lock building levels, because if you're unaware, when a building levels up, it doesn't level up. So we know that there are 3 models of this, the level 1, 3, and 5 model. It's not going to go from this model to the level 3 model that looks just like this. It could spawn any level 3 model that's 4 units deep. So if you're looking for a particular aesthetic, you're not going to really be able to do that in a very controlled way unless you're plopping the Growables, and it can be a little messy without that. Now, right here, we've got some of the 2-unit assets, and I do appreciate that it doesn't seem completely crazy to have these here side by side with some of the 4-unit deep assets. However, I do think a little bit more control would be nice, because I would, again, like to see some of the same buildings side by side, and then have maybe this little bit taller building right next to that. But overall, these are incredibly attractive assets. And I want to take it to the next level. So now I want to mix things in a little bit. So we're going to take a mixed use building and kind of sprinkle it through these areas. And now that we've let things spawn in, again, the streetscape feels absolutely wonderful right here. I love this so much. Here's one of our mixed use buildings, a little bit taller, fits in very nicely here. I love that we got a little bit of street presence, a nice corner here, feels fairly residential on this side. On this side, definitely feels like a commercial storefront, which I love. Now, this will only fit in that one direction, and it does leave kind of a weird, awkward blank wall here. So I think that having this configuration that I have right here is potentially not ideal for the specific asset. This corner, boy, I love this asset so much. And then right here, we've got another one of those that has spawned in. So you're gonna wanna probably really mix these assets up just based on what we're seeing here. We're kind of seeing the same assets spawning in over and over and over. I think with leveling up and a bit more asset mixing, things could look really good. For instance, tossing that right there feels very good, completes this area, makes it feel much better in my opinion. Now on the other side, I did the exact same thing. I like this asset a lot. I've seen this building a lot in communities throughout Wisconsin, but my problem with it is that this is that one asset that's 5x5. And because I inadvertently zoned 5x5 twice, I get these buildings, and I don't love that I get the same building twice. So you're gonna probably wanna be really specific. These ones right here are actually these are the mixed use buildings again, but I believe there's also a medium density residential that looks very similar to this. And if you're not careful, you'll spawn that same building over and over and over again. But boy, oh boy, I just love these assets so much. These remind me so much of home. That's what I've been missing personally in the region packs. It really makes your build feel a lot more homey, for lack of a better way of explaining it. Just very, very nice assets. And finally, I want to do a fit test with lots of existing assets around it. So we're going to add in some of our office buildings right around this area. And then I want to replace some of the uses along Main Street with some of our mixed residential. And then right here along Broad Street, I want to replace just some of these assets right here with some of the new row homes. Let's also add a couple of high density residential, maybe getting rid of a building like this that looks suburban. Now let's add in a couple of our signature buildings. It looks like we have the Atkin Palmer unlocked, not surprising. We also have our 2 commercial buildings unlocked, so I'll plop these as well. I purposely entered this mode to see if I could figure out which assets are which. A couple of them jump out to me. Like right here, you can see that there are some covered windows on that asset. That's an awesome detail. That's just something, I didn't even notice that looking at the assets, but that is fantastic. But also just, I mean, these are just very attractive. They're just really attractive. Again, though, some of the wall-to-wall buildings don't line up quite as well as you might hope. For this one in particular, I'd probably move the signature building to try to cover up some of those windows, but it is something just to be aware of. You might want to use a little bit of move it to make that fit perfectly. And you should be able to use the relocate function in a vanilla game to line that up very nicely as well. But wow, these assets just look really, really good. Some of these are very large relative to, I guess, how big I thought they were. Seeing them as standalone assets certainly makes them feel smaller, but these high density residential buildings, first of all, it feels like one larger building when they all spawn in side by side like this, and they are much larger than I realized. Now here's one of our 5/1s, and boy, it looks awesome. It just looks so good next to the rest of the assets right here. Absolutely outstanding. And it doesn't clash at all with the vanilla assets, which I love. As far as some of our office towers, here's one. Yeah, that one doesn't maybe fit quite as well in this particular build, but I could see how it could fit very well in some other builds. So maybe I've got to use some of the office towers a bit more judiciously or pick my spots, because this is another one, and this one fits very, very well, at least in my opinion. Now I'm going to go back over to the row homes, and yeah, I think where I've landed with the row homes is I think I'm going to want to plop these. I think that you can get a nice aesthetic, but there's no way to hold it unless you're plopping them. So for me, that's probably the route I'm going to go with these, but they still look really, really good. There's a couple more spots that we added some of our mixed use in here. And honestly, I can tell which buildings they are because I've seen the vanilla ones so much, but they don't clash. The colors look good. They all feel like things are meshing well together. I bet you would have thought that this is not a vanilla building and that this is one of them that came with the region pack. This is a vanilla building. This one right here came with the region pack. And then we've got some of our row homes in between that are vanilla, and it all just really blends well seamlessly together. So very happy with the way that these are blending together. And then finally, I like to take a look at the assets at night just to get a feel for how much lighting they have. And you can tell that for the most part, there's not a ton of lighting on these assets. And bluntly, I think it makes sense. A lot of these are very historic buildings, and a lot of the lighting would occur on the street, not necessarily on the buildings themselves, considering some of these buildings would have been built when there was no electricity. Now, I do think it's a little bit of a shame that these buildings don't have lighting. It feels like they probably should, considering these are fairly modern, and the level 5 variant does have it. So kind of interesting there. In terms of some of our medium density assets, it looks like they have a little bit more lighting, maybe a little bit more consistent as well. So good to see that on the street level. Right here with our high density assets, I like that there is not a pattern. Again, I like that there's a lot of variation with where the lighting is occurring, and it feels like they are fairly well illuminated, which is great to see. Now moving over to our service center assets, this is what I'm really interested in. I love that. I love that. This water tower has a red light on the top, and you know, the one that's closest to where I live has that exact same light showing planes where this thing is. Looks outstanding. Our clinics also lit up very well, as are our other city service buildings. And then finally, looking at our signature buildings, the mansion right here, no lights on it, but this thing's probably 200 years old, so that makes perfect sense to me. And then for these other buildings, a bit more. And our Imperial State building, boy, this is really a striking asset. I don't know who worked on this, but kudos to you. Pat on the back. That is beautiful. Probably one of the best looking assets in the game in general. That is awesome. And with that, we've taken a look at everything that the Northeastern Region Pack has to offer, as well as everything that the region packs in general have to offer. This was a really special pack. To me, this is the one that feels the most like home, so I really, really like it. And though I wish we had some low density residential and maybe a little bit more of the commercial buildings because they're so great, I think that I'm gonna be able to use these assets all over the place. Just like some of the other region packs, this one makes me feel like being able to lock buildings at specific levels is absolutely mandatory. And I really hope that that feature gets added to the vanilla game. But more than just that, this region pack in particular makes me feel like the ability to plop growables in a vanilla game is really becoming something that is really desirable. Listen, some of the region packs basically have buildings that you're going to want to splice together to fill in entire blocks. And for an asset pack like this one, being able to ensure that you only have one public market and that it's exactly where you want it to be is going to be imperative, because having a couple of those side by side just looks ridiculous. And when you have control over assets this beautiful, you can create some really interesting things. But when you don't, things can feel really incoherent and kind of just bizarre. Now, as excited as I am that we got all of this great content, I feel like I have to mention one thing. After getting 8 region packs, a couple of content creator packs, DLC that was turned into base game content, and then the base game themes, there are a lot of icons in the user interface, and it's becoming difficult to find zoning categories and buildings. So I really hope that Colossal Order goes back to the drawing board and tries to figure out a better organizational scheme. There are mods that help with it, but I think that we shouldn't be relying on mods for basic UI tweaks. And reasonably, that only helps a certain subset of people anyway. If you're playing on GeForce now, you can't use those tweaks. And in the future, when console's available, it's not going to help those console players either. At this point, I find myself getting lost looking for a specific school, for instance, or a specific zoning category, and I feel like with a couple of tweaks around the edges, things could make a lot more sense. And speaking of things not making a lot of sense, right now it's impossible to isolate the vanilla zoning categories and buildings. You can isolate every region pack, you can isolate the content creator packs, but it's completely impossible to isolate the vanilla buildings. And I think it's just demonstrating some of the issues with the user interface at this point in time. But to take a step back, these are the complaints of someone dealing with an embarrassment of riches. At this point, if you buy the game, you get the base game, plus you get a DLC for free, the 4 Palm Tree DLC, plus you get 8 region packs. There's actually quite a bit of content here that you would get for $50. But in general, I can't help but be impressed by the trajectory of the game. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the crashing issues that people have been experiencing. I hope that those are resolved. I hope we get official asset support soon, and I really hope that the game comes to console. But back to the region packs, I want to give kudos to every single asset creator that created content for these region packs. Everything was absolutely outstanding. The quality for all of these was amazing, and they've really made the game a lot more fun for me. And I know that I'm not the only one that feels that way. But I also want to thank Colossal Order and Paradox for paying these asset creators to put these together and then offering the region packs up to us for free, because they didn't have to do that. And they've honestly put together something that is really outstanding, offering assets that I had dreamed about seeing in Cities Skylines 1 for the entire length of the game, and now we have them a year and a half into Cities Skylines 2. And Colossal Order, Paradox, if you're hearing me right now, you should really consider releasing region packs generally as DLC. I can't be the only one who wants to see their home specifically represented. If there was a Midwestern USA region pack, you better believe I would buy that. However, if you go down that path, I really hope that there's a bit more predictability. I'd like to see all zoning categories covered, including industrial, which wasn't represented in any of the region packs. I'd also like to see vehicles, road signage, and it'd be great to have a predictable number of service buildings covered with each and every asset pack. So please, Colossal Order Paradox, consider it, because there are lots of places that didn't get covered, particularly places in the Southern Hemisphere that basically got no love at all, that would love to have some sort of a region pack, even if it's a paid content creator pack or DLC. But with that, our trip around the world has been concluded and we are done with region packs. And honestly, I'm very pleased with these. I can't wait to use these all in my builds, and I can't wait to get back to regular episodes here on the channel now that region packs have concluded. So with that, we're going to leave it here, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this one. If you did, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. I want to thank you so much for your time today. There's a million things that you could have been doing. You decided to hang out with me and go over this region pack, and for that, I appreciate you, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me. Can't wait to see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.